This message has no affiliation with the Department of War. All right, welcome back, everyone. Today we begin with the Monroe Doctrine of 1823. President James Monroe's clear declaration that the Western Hemisphere is off limits to European colonial powers. Then came Theodore Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy in the early 1900s. Speak softly and carry a big stick, adding real muscle to protect U.S. interests through strength and decisive action. These weren't just old policies, they were blueprints for American security, sovereignty, and leadership in our own backyard. And in 2026, under President Donald Trump's second term, they're not relics. They are roaring back to life better than ever. With the 2025 National Security Strategy introducing the Monroe Doctrine, as we like to call it, America is reasserting strength in the Western Hemisphere. We are denying space to China, Russia, and Iran, securing our borders for migration and drugs, and protecting vital resources like oil and our strategic assets. The recent decisive operation in Venezuela, you may have heard of it, capturing Nicolas Maduro, is proof positive. Weakness invites chaos, and strength restores order and prosperity. If you're ready to celebrate real leadership, putting our hemisphere and our homeland first, then stick around because this is the Martin Memo. The Martin Memo. To understand the Monroe Doctrine, we need to set the scene in the early 19th century. The world was in flux. Napoleon Bonaparte had been defeated at Waterloo in 1815, and the Congress of Vienna redrew Europe's maps to restore monarchies and prevent future revolutions. But across the Atlantic, things were just starting to heat up. From 1810 to 1825, leaders like Simón Bolívar and José de San Martin led independence movements that shattered Spanish rule in South America. Countries like Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia were born free, or so they hoped. The U.S. watched this with excitement and a tidbit of anxiety. On one hand, these new republics aligned with American ideals of self-governance. But on the other hand, European powers like Spain, France, and even Russia were scheming to intervene. Russia, for instance, was pushing claims along the Pacific Northwest coast. This is now what we call Oregon. And the Holy Alliance, that was a pact between Russia, Austria, and Prussia, vowed to crush liberal uprisings everywhere, including the Americas. Now enter the British. They had their own reasons to oppose recolonization. Free trade with independent Latin American nations was lucrative for their merchants. British Foreign Minister George Canning proposed a joint Anglo-American statement warning Europe to back off. It sounded like a good deal, right? Even former presidents Thomas Jefferson and James Madison supported it. But Secretary of State John Quincy Adams pushed back. He argued that teaming up with Britain would tie American hands and make the U.S. look like Britain's junior partner. Instead, Adams convinced Monroe to go solo, a unilateral declaration that would assert U.S. independence and ambition. On December 2nd, 1823, during his 7th annual message to Congress, that's the equivalent of our State of the Union, President James Monroe laid it out. Buried in a long speech about everything from canals to Native American affairs were 3 key paragraphs that would change history. So let me quote the essence. Monroe declared that the political systems of the Old World and New World were fundamentally different. The U.S. would not interfere in European wars or internal affairs. In return, the Western Hemisphere was off limits for any future colonization. Any attempts by European powers to extend their system to the Americas would be viewed as dangerous to our peace and safety. Oh, and all the existing colonies, the U.S. would not touch them, at least not yet. It was a mix of idealism and pragmatism, promoting republicanism while carving out a U.S. sphere of influence. But here's the best part. The U.S. at this time was all bark, no bite. They didn't have any real military muscle to back it up. No massive navy, no standing army worth fearing. Nothing. Europe pretty much just shrugged it off. One French diplomat even called it a bluster. Ironically, the doctrine's early enforcement came courtesy of, you guessed it, the British Royal Navy. Britain's Pax Britannica, their era of naval dominance, aligned with keeping Europeans out, so they quietly supported it without admitting it. Now, fast forward a couple of decades, and the Monroe Doctrine starts flexing. In the 1840s, President James Polk invoked it during the Mexican-American War. The U.S. annexed Texas, California, and more, expanding westward under the banner of Manifest Destiny. Then, in 1865, during the Civil War, France, under Napoleon III, installed Maximilian as Emperor of Mexico, which was a clear violation. Once the Union won, Secretary of State William Seward pressured France to withdraw, citing the doctrine. They did, and Maximilian was actually executed. Score one for Monroe's ghost. But the doctrine wasn't static. By the late 19th century, as the U.S. industrialized and built a navy, it evolved. In 1895, during a border dispute between Venezuela and British Guiana, President Grover Cleveland demanded arbitration, invoking the doctrine to say the U.S. would enforce it, even against Britain. Britain, of course, backed down. That's what they do best, signaling America's rising power. So, what is the legacy of the Monroe Doctrine? Today, as we hit 200 years, it is still referenced. In a multipolar world with China and Russia expanding influence in the Americas through investments and alliances, does the doctrine hold any water? One thing is for certain. What started as a defensive stance against colonialism morphed into a tool for projection of power. It reflects America's journey from underdog to superpower. And that brings us up to our turning point. How this defensive shield became a tool for assertive American power, setting the stage for the man who gave it teeth, Theodore Roosevelt. To grasp big stick diplomacy, we rewind to the turn of the 20th century. The U.S. had just flexed in the Spanish-American War of 1898, snagging Cuba, Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Enter Theodore Roosevelt in 1901, ascending to the presidency after McKinley's assassination. TR, as he was known, was a progressive dynamo at home and an expansionist abroad. He believed in civilized nations guiding the barbarian ones, a worldview shaped by imperialism. The policy name? It stems from a West African proverb Roosevelt loved, first cited in a letter as New York's governor. Publicly, he used it in 1901 to advocate naval buildup. The big stick was America's growing navy, the ultimate backup to diplomatic whispers. At its core, big stick diplomacy meant avoiding unnecessary wars, but ensuring military might could enforce U.S. interests. That sounds very familiar, doesn't it? It sounds like our peace through strength model we currently have. Teddy Roosevelt declared that if Latin American nations couldn't handle their debts or instability, risking European meddling, the U.S. would step in as the hemisphere cop. Now, this twisted Monroe's original hands-off into active interventionism. So let's go over the highlights of this. First up, the Venezuela crisis of 1902 and 1903. Venezuela owed money to Britain, Germany, and Italy, who blockaded its ports. Roosevelt, wary of European footholds, meditated secretly, invoking the Monroe Doctrine. He threatened U.S. naval action, forcing arbitration. Then the crown jewel, the Panama Canal. Teddy Roosevelt dreamed of linking the Atlantic to the Pacific for trade and military speed. Colombia, which controlled Panama at the time, balked at the U.S. terms. So in 1903, Roosevelt backed Panama rebels with a naval blockade, preventing Colombian troops from intervening. Panama gained independence, and the U.S. got canal rights for $10 million plus annual payments. Construction began in 1904, opening in 1914, which was a triumph of engineering and big stick muscle. Then the interventions started piling up. In 1904, the Dominican Republic faced debt defaults. Teddy Roosevelt sent Marines to collect customs, stabilizing finances without European help. Similar moves in Cuba, 1906, Nicaragua in 1909, and Haiti in 1915 all followed, often under later presidents, but rooted in Roosevelt's playbook. Now, Big Stick wasn't just Latin focused. Roosevelt flexed globally, mediating the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. Japan shocked the world by trouncing Russia. Both sides were exhausted, but Roosevelt hosted peace talks in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, brokering a treaty that earned him the Nobel Peace Prize, the first for a U.S. president. It balanced the power in Asia, protecting U.S. interests in the Philippines and open door policy with China. To showcase the stick, TR sent the Great White Fleet on a world tour from 1907 to 1909. 16 battleships painted white visited ports worldwide, demonstrating U.S. naval prowess without firing a single shot. It was a soft speak with a massive backup. Roosevelt left office in 1909, but Big Stick echoes on. Successors like Taft shifted to dollar diplomacy, but interventions continued through the World Wars and Cold War. In Latin America, it fueled anti-U.S. sentiment, leading to policies like FDR's Good Neighbor in the 1930s. These two policies, Monroe's warning and TR's Big Stick, formed the backbone of hemispheric security for generations. They kept foreign empires out and ensured America led from strength. But after decades of neglect, open borders, and adversaries like China buying up ports and mines, they needed a revival. That is exactly what we are seeing today. Now, first, a quick refresher for context. The Monroe Doctrine, declared in 1823, was America's line in the sand. Europe, stay out of the Americas and we will stay out of yours. It was defensive at first, but evolved into a shield for U.S. interest. Then came Theodore Roosevelt's Big Stick diplomacy in the early 1900s. Speak softly and carry a big stick. TR added muscle, justifying interventions to prevent European interference like in the Dominican Republic or building the Panama Canal. It was pragmatic conservatism, protect what's ours with strength, not endless wars, what we see today. Fast forward to today, after years of neglect under previous administrations, President Trump has revived these ideas with vigor. In his 2025 national security strategy, he introduced the Trump Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. This isn't dusty history. It's a common sense restoration of American power. It declares the Western Hemisphere is off limits to non-hemispheric competitors like China, Russia, and Iran, who can't position forces or control key assets here. Conservatives applaud this. Why let Beijing buy up ports and mines while we foot the bill for global defense? The Big Stick is back too. With Trump channeling TR's forceful diplomacy, it's not about imperialism, it is about security. Trump promised to tackle migration, drugs, and foreign influence head on, and he is delivering with adjusted military presence. This is America leading from strength, not apology tours. Let's look at how this is unfolding in real time. Ground zero, Venezuela. For years, Nicolas Maduro's regime was a socialist nightmare propped up by Russia, China, and Iran, exporting chaos, drugs, and migrants to our borders. President Trump didn't just sanction, he acted. In early January 2026, U.S. forces captured Maduro on narco-terrorism charges, a swift, decisive operation that echoes Big Stick interventions like TR's in Panama. Now, Trump says America will run Venezuela to stabilize it, sell its oil, and rebuild under U.S. oversight. From a conservative view, this is genius. Secure our energy, crush cartels like Tren de Aragua, and send a message that failed states won't drag us down. Critics say imperialism, but remember, Biden's weakness let this fester. Trump's fixing it, and he's doing one heck of a job. This Monroe Doctrine extends beyond Venezuela. He's warned Colombia and Mexico cooperate on drugs and migration or face the consequences. Even Greenland's on notice. Trump's eyeing it for strategic reasons, denying China a foothold in the Arctic. And Cuba? Secretary of State Marco Rubio signaling that they're in trouble if they keep hosting Russian assets. Now, this is big stick in action. Speak loudly when needed, but back it with power. Conservatives see this as reclaiming our hemisphere from adversaries who exploit weakness. Economically, it's paying dividends. Trump's pushing for U.S. companies to dominate critical supply chains like rare earths and minerals, keeping them away from Chinese hands. Tariffs on non cooperative nations, bailouts for allies like Argentina, it's all about leveraging strength for prosperity. No more free rides for globalists. But it's not just muscle, it's smart strategy. Trump's enlisting allies, rewarding those who align with America first, and pressuring others. In the Middle East and Europe, he's pulling back from endless commitments to focus here, echoing Monroe's non interference in old world affairs. Conservatives love this. Why bleed treasure abroad when threats are at our southern border and beyond? Of course, the left wing media is calling it neo imperialism, but from our perspective, it's sovereignty restored. Past administrations apologized for U.S. power. President Trump, he celebrates it, and as he should. As he said on the Doctrine's anniversary, reinvigorated by my Trump corollary, the Monroe Doctrine is alive and well, and American leadership is coming roaring back. This is a counter against China's belt and road traps and Russia's meddling, protecting freedom and free markets abroad. Looking ahead in 2026, we are going to expect more. Potential actions in Cuba, deeper ties with pro-US leaders, and a fortified military posture. The Monroe Doctrine, as some call it, isn't about conquest. It's about security, prosperity, and putting America first. In a dangerous world, big stick diplomacy ensures we negotiate from strength, not surrender. Conservatives know weakness invites aggression. Trump's revival of these policies is a win for our nation, our hemisphere, and our future. What started as a bold 1823 warning against foreign meddling, strengthened by TR's big stick, is now fully revived under President Trump. The Monroe Doctrine and big stick diplomacy aren't just history. They're the playbook delivering security, energy independence, and American leadership today. Now, with that being said, it's time to go over my favorite segment of the week, and that is the cold monologue. For those of you who do not know what the cold monologue is, you ask us questions throughout the week. My editor-in-chief writes them down, puts them in a hat, and then I answer them cold. I have no prior knowledge on what is being asked. So let's dive into it. What is your most controversial opinion? Well, I have many. One of them that I have not discussed on here is my thoughts on abortion. I know I've talked about abortion a lot, but this one is a little more specific. We need to defund Planned Parenthood all the way, right? But we need to take that money and invest it into our new parents and our single parents, because a lot of times people are met with a hard decision. Are they going to keep the baby? And a lot of times they turn to abortion because they don't have the resources necessary and they feel like they're all alone. We need to fund these programs. Do you know how much abortion would be stripped if we funded these programs and gave parents at least another thought to keep the baby? I think it would be a lot harder to say no if they had programs that could help them. Being a parent is one of the most difficult things to do. That's what I'm told, at least. I haven't been a parent yet, but it is one of the most difficult things to do. And if you have help, I guarantee you, you would be more willing to keep that baby when put in a hard position. Regardless, I am pro-life all the way, but we need to invest into these centers and into these programs to give people a place to turn to when dealing with hardship. Well, folks, that is all we have in store for today. Be sure to join us on Monday as we have another live stream. It will be on YouTube, same time as always, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Bring your questions, bring all the energy and fun. I will be on there speaking on a plethora of other topics. I cannot wait to see you there. Be sure to share your thoughts on X. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at the Martin Memo. and do not forget to subscribe on YouTube. Now, in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. This is the Martin Memo. The Martin Memo.